Okay, so here's the challenge that we're going to be working on. We'll be creating a new Rails project, and we're going to be using scaffolding to do so. So scaffolding is what you saw me demo really early on in this course when I first showed you Rails. It's that way of defining a Rails project by describing a database table and having Rails code up everything for you. So Rails is going to generate all of our routes for us, our controller for us, our model for us, all of the associated views. It'll build a full CRUD application for us. Scaffolding is a really impressive thing to show people, to sort of show off Rails. And so when Rails was very first released by David Hannemeyer Hansen, he did like the 15-minute build a blog tutorial where he sort of showed off scaffolding. But these days, most Rails programmers don't tend to use scaffolding when they build an application because you often don't need everything that scaffolding provides. It sort of would maybe over-engineer the system. What I really like to do with scaffolding is anytime a new version of Rails is released, I will make a scaffolded app because that shows me the opinions of the Rails core team about how Rails should be done. Right? So when I look at a scaffolded app, I can see how a controller should be written and how the associated views should be written, and I can make sure I'm sort of doing things in the Rails way. So that's why I use scaffolding. I don't use it to build my products, but I use it often to base my code on the scaffolded code. So we're going to start at the SSH console for our Vagrant box, and we're going to be in our Rails subfolder, and we're going to make I already have a project called Simple Store because I made one with the other section. So I'm going to do a Rails new store simple. So the Rails new command is going to create a store simple folder for me, put a whole bunch of files and folders into it. One of those is a gem file, which includes all of the gems that Rails depends upon. Then it's going to call bundle install. It will parse that gem file and pull in all of the dependencies. So we can see we've got all the dependencies now. Part of what it created is also a git ignore file, and it also ran git init for us. So remember, Rails is this very opinionated framework. It's like convention over configuration. So one of the conventions is that Rails just assumes that you use git for version control, so it runs git init for you already so that you have a .git folder in your project, and it puts a git ignore file into there to ignore the standard files and folders that a Rails project would want to ignore. And so if we were to look at that, this is what the git ignore looks like. It ignores the bundle config file if there is any. It ignores our SQLite 3 databases. Sometimes I want my database to be brought under version control. For a small project where maybe I want to share a database with team members, I might bring the database under control. So I might remove line 11. The log file, the temp files, they're all ignored. We can navigate to that store simple folder. If we did a git status, we would see, it's got a whole bunch of untracked files. And we could do our very first commit. We could do a git add dot. That stages everything. And then git commit -m. So remember, the dot will look at the current folder, stage all the files in the current folder, and any other subfolders below that. And then commit initial commit of a new Rails app. And that's always my initial commit with a Rails project. It's always the same thing.
The first command is git add.
You got it, git add dot. And then git commit -m with a message. Yes, you got it. -m for message. And the reason you have to explicitly do that is because you could do a git commit without the -m, and it will open up the message editor, so like whatever the default text editor is in the system. So for me, it would be Vim, and it would allow you to write a longer commit message. So if you just did git commit, Vim would open up, and you could do a short commit message at the first line, and then you could leave a space, and then underneath that you could do a long form commit. So if you had a lot to say about a commit, you could do it without the -m. I rarely do that. My commit messages are usually short, but sometimes it can be helpful to do a long commit message. Okay, so that's good. We've got this project up and operational. It's at this point that we would open it up in RubyMine. I've got a project open in RubyMine already. I'm going to just go File, Open, and I'm going to find that folder. So it's going to be in my C Vagrant Rails store simple folder. And I'm going to open it in my current window, so I will close the existing one. And I have a few processes that I can terminate. One of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to start SSH session, so I don't have to go to a separate Commander window anymore. I can just have my terminal right within my IDE. So this only works if you set up Vagrant under Settings, Tools, Vagrant. So if you have it, you'll have to continue using Commander. And there's no real difference other than the fact that I just get this embedded terminal, which I then use to navigate to my folder. If I do a git status, we can see that Git has picked up this .idea folder. That's RubyMine that put that in. Right? That's all IntelliJ products will always put a .idea in there. And it's not a good idea to have that under version control, right? You don't want your tool config to be part of your version control. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our git ignore, and we're going to add to it ignore the RubyMine config folder. /idea/star. So ignore all files within .idea. If I run git status again now from my command prompt, the only thing it detects is the fact that I changed my git ignore, which is fine. And so I can add that. At this point, we don't even need to do git by way of the command prompt anymore. We can do it by way of our tooling, right? So I could right click on this, and I could say git add and git commit. And I can put my git commit message right in here. It shows me my delta right in line, ignoring the RubyMine getBrains config folder in the git ignore. And I can commit right from within my tool. So it's up to you how you want to do Git in this course. If you want to, I find when I'm working within RubyMine, doing Git by way of RubyMine is really nice because it gives me my diff right within my commit prompt. You can continue to use the command prompt version if you want. You could use something like Git Kraken, but I like the integrated Git support. It works nicely. And now I can close that out. Okay, so let's look at what we needed to do here. We've got our Rails project. It's initialized as a Git repo. We want to use scaffolding now to create, and this is a term that I just use, an MVC bundle, meaning like the whole model view controller, everything for a product. And a product is going to be defined to be a title, which is a string, a description, which is text, a price, which is decimal, and a stock quantity as an integer. And again, multiple ways of doing this. So I could do it by way of, not that, Rails G scaffold. I could also do it by way of going to tools and run Rails generator, and I could pick the scaffold generator. So I get autocomplete, I could pick scaffold, and then I could type things in there as well. Here I would start with the product. Here I would put the word product after scaffold. I will use this just simply because the font size is bigger. It'll be easier to read. So Rails G scaffold, G stands for generate, so I'm generating a scaffold of what? A product, and a product is a title, which is a string, so it's a title colon string, and then a space, and then it's a description, which is a text, and it's a price, which is a decimal, and it's a stock quantity, which is an integer. This is where you want to be really careful about spelling mistakes, because your choice of title, description, price, and stock quantity, and the spelling of those things, that's going to become part of your database table now, right? Each one of these things is going to be a column in your database. Title column, description column, price column, stock quantity column. So we want to just really be sure. Otherwise, you could be stuck forever with bad spelling, because we're scaffolding, those poor spelling mistakes are going to be scattered in a bunch of files as well, not just in the database, but they're going to be all over the place. Enter. Generates a bunch of stuff for us. If we had done that by way of the tooling, it would have automatically opened up some of the generated files for us. If we had used RubyMine's tooling, it would have automatically opened up the model in the app models folder, the product model. It would have automatically opened up the products controller in the app controllers folder. It would have automatically opened up the migration in the DB migrate folder. It also would have automatically opened up the scaffold generated CSS and the scaffold generated test skeleton. And so we're going to leave those aside for now. The migration has not yet run, but this is how we sort of, in our version control, keep track of the changes that are being made to our database. And you can see this is a create table for the products. We want to run that migration to bring our products table into existence. Again, we have multiple ways of doing that. I could run a Rails DB migrate by way of my terminal, or I could go to tools, and there is this thing that says run rake task. We haven't seen the word rake before. In older versions of Rails, we would have used it already. So when we do Rails DB migrate, that's actually just an alias for rake DB migrate. They aliased over to Rails because beginners to the Rails framework were getting confused as to when to use the Rails command and when to use the rake command. The rake command, like rake, is a Ruby gem, which is a task runner. It is called rake because there's a task runner in the C world called make that runs off of make files. With rake, it runs off of rake files. And you can sort of define programmatically tasks and subtasks that you want to run. So we could run rake DB migrate right now. We could run Rails DB migrate right now. But let's try, what it looks like from the tooling if we go to run rake task, it shows us all the possible tasks. You can see all the DB prefixed ones, and we can do a DB and it sort of auto-completes for us migrate, and we can hit tab to do so. And then it asks me, like, you want to migrate the database. You could pick where you wanted to migrate to, so you could step up or step down through your migrations. I just want to go to the latest migration. Which database do you want to affect? Well, we have 3 possibilities. There's a development, a test, and a production. We're going to be working in development. That's the default. And so we'll click OK. Thumbs up. Migrated the database. No real difference, though, between that and just running it in the terminal. And it's at this point we might want to do a Git commit, right? I might do it for my whole folder. So I might click on Simple Store and do a Git add and a Git commit. I don't like this. It always leaves the last commit message in there. I don't even want to be tempted to reuse my last commit message. And so here it's showing us all the files that were either added or modified. And here I can say, added a new MVC bundle for a product in order to start my e-commerce empire. And I can commit that. You'll see that there's color coding that happens, which is like Git enabled color coding. So files that are new show up as like green, both in the tabs up at the top and within the project tree, and modified files show up as red. So you get like a visual indication as to sort of the state of your Git when you view your tabs or when you view your project. I can close my schema now. I can look at the product model. It's currently empty. It might be nice to add some validation here. Some things that like what makes a valid product. And so I could say like validates title, and I'll leave description off as being optional, but I'll say that the title and the price and the stock quantity have a presence of true. So we will not be able to add to the database or save a product object to the database if we haven't provided a non-blank title, price, stock quantity. We might also want to say that the price has a numericality of true, or even better, a numericality of true and the fact that it's greater than, and here it's like, well, what should it be greater than? Like 0? So I can't have free products in my website. Maybe that's a business rule of mine. Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe eventually I want to have free products, but this is just one we'll use for an example. So now price will be guaranteed to be a number, not just any number, but one that is greater than 0. And I can also do a similar thing for, well, I could do 2 things here. One, I could make stock quantity part of that as well, which seems fair, right? Stock quantity should also be a number which is greater than 0. But there's an additional thing about stock quantity is that you probably don't want stock quantity to be a fractional number, right? You don't want to have half of a thing of stock. And so it might be better to have stock quantity sort of outside of this. So I could delete that and then say like stock quantity also has a numericality verification, but like I want it to be only an integer, and I want it to be greater or equal to 0. So there, I'll make it a little bit different. So there, price has a numericality where it can be a fractional number greater than 0, but stock quantity has a numericality where it must be an integer, and that integer must be greater than or equal to 0, because it's totally valid to have 0 stock of something. And I could add other validations here, like minimum length for my title or something along those lines, whatever. We'll leave it at these. And now we might want to see if we can create a new product by way of the console. So I can go to Tools, and I can run the Rails console. And I can do things like, well, product.count should give me a 0. But I should also be able to do like product.create, and I can create a product named shoe phone with a description, a mobile phone in your shoe. And I'm about to scroll off the side, so it says capital P product create on the left there. And then I also need a price and a stock quantity. So for all of these, this is a comma delimited list of key value pairs with each key ending in a colon. And so it's product.create name colon and then the string shoe phone, comma, description colon, and then a string for the description, another comma, price colon, and then just a hard-coded price, comma, stock quantity colon, and a hard-coded stock quantity. That should pass all of my validations. I typoed the name, it's actually title. You can hit the up arrow. So if you hit the up arrow, it gives you the the history. I can go to the front of the line here, and I can change name to title, and I can try again. That looks like it worked. I see the insert statement that actually did the persistence, and then a product.count should return 1, and a product.first.title should say shoe phone. So it looks like my model's working. I'm able to persist to the products table. And meanwhile, we use scaffolding. So we also got a whole CRUD application built for us. And so if we now go to run, we can say run Rails. No, I don't want to run the Rails console. I want to run my Rails application. How do I do that? Maybe just run. Let's see what happens if I just do run. Yeah, that's what I want. I want this one right here. The little tiny Rails icon and development simple store. If we weren't using RubyMine, at this point we would do a Rails space S for server, and that would invoke our Puma server. But this is going to do just that for us, and it's going to capture it in a nice little tab here. So here is Puma, our built-in HTTP server. So remember, Rails just ships with the Puma gem, which is an HTTP server, so you don't have to have Apache or an Nginx loaded up on your server. It's running on port 3000, and we set Vagrant up to forward 3000 into our virtual machine, so that's good. The console here, debugging information is going to pop up on this console as we interact with the website, and the server log is also here. So in our code, if we needed to do log messages, we could use the Rails logger to log warnings or errors, and we would see those appear in this development log. That's really just the file that's sitting right here. So it's just giving us real-time access to that file. And at this point, this means we should be able to go to a new tab and open up localhost :3000. And we should be able to see that we're on Rails. It gives us some information about the version of Rails that we're using and the version of Ruby that we're using. But what we really wanted to see was our products. So we go to /products. And it's here where our full CRUD application exists. So if I go to new product and I try to create a new product, I can't. Primarily because I didn't make the validations. For some of the validations, if it can, Rails will make them into HTML5 validations for us. So the fact that we asked for a stock quantity that was a whole number, you can see that this is now an input of type number that we can like go up and down, and we can only put numeric values into it. That's really nice. It still has a validation on the back end though, right? HTML5 and JavaScript validations are always defeatable, right? JavaScript I can just turn off. HTML5 I can literally just edit HTML live, right? So I can go in here and I can go to the type and I can just remove it. And then I can put in something that's not a number there. But that doesn't fool Rails, right? That just fools the HTML5. It still told me the stock quantity is not a number. And so you get both front-end validations by way of HTML5 attributes if possible, and you still get back-end validations when the data is posted to the back-end, which is sort of a nice way of handling things. I see the product that I added by way of the console. I could destroy it. I could show it on its own individual page by way of its ID, its primary key. I could edit it by way of a little form and update it. Oh, we bought one of these. You can take the stock quantity down and update that. Takes us to the show page. We can go back to this page. It's pretty nice. This might be how you go about starting your project, right? You might scaffold up a resource and then you want to fill it with some data. And so we can see that process now. I can use the Faker gem to do so. So I could open up my gem file. Around line 35 here, I can add the gem Faker. And then I can go to Tools, Bundler, Install, and make sure that Bundler pulls that gem into my project. And then I can head over to my seed script, and I can generate a whole bunch of fake products to give some interesting data to work with in this project. So let's do just that. DB seeds. And within here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate 1,000 products. I want to create, what do I want to create? A product with, it's not name, it's title. And that'll be Faker Commerce unique product name. Description is going to be, what is it not like there? Oh, it needs a comma. The description is going to be a double-quoted string, and at the end of which I'm going to use Faker Commerce material. and put a period at the end of it. And I'll change that, I'll add to that in a moment, but it would scroll off the side, so I won't just add to it yet. And then for the price, I'm going to use faker, commerce, price. And then for the stock quantity, I will use faker, number, digit, 3. And that will give me 3-digit numbers for my stock quantities. And I'm missing a comma again right there. Is it digits? Yeah, digits. I'll give you a moment to copy that all down. Again, it's a single create statement, so the create parentheses begins here and it ends here. It's looped in at times where I'm, gonna do 1,000 of these. I think I could speed things up by asking Active Record to open up a database transaction at the beginning of this block and close it at the end. Because I have a feeling that what's going to happen here is for this create statement, it's going to create a separate database transaction for each one. So we'll have that transaction sort of setup and teardown time. So it might be a bit slow, but off the top of my head, I can't remember how to do a forced transaction here and here. So we'll just leave that. I've got my title, my description, my price, and my stock quantity. Those should all pass my validations. I'm going to expand my description to say, surprisingly, this product is made out of pure, and then leave the material. And now again, I could run the seed script in one of two ways. I could run it from my terminal by running Rails space db seed, or I could run it by way of a rake task and finding the db seed rake task. So I'll just run it here, Rails db seed. You'll probably find that you gravitate to one or the other. You might like to use the terminal exclusively. You might memorize all of the various hotkeys that RubyMine has to offer, and you might use the built-in RubyMine functionality. And so running this rake seed, let me just give myself some debug information here. Created product.count products, period. And let's blow away that shoe phone that was in there. Let's always, before running our script, destroy all products. So running the seed script will always sort of give us a blank slate and 1,000 new products. And I can now run Rails db seed, which will take a little bit of time. And again, it's my gut feeling that the time, well, I've got an error, so that's first things first. Did you mean digit? I thought so. Let me go look at the faker docs. Oh, it's just number. No, is that what I wanted? Number 10, parameter digits. Ah, the parameter is the digits. Okay. Number. Yeah, digits. That's better. Let's try that again. Rails db seed. So I think what makes this slow is the sort of opening and reopening of a whole bunch of database transactions. What also might make it slow is like the .unique here. I don't know how big of a set of product names Faker can create. But when you do a .unique, it's going to keep track of every name it's generated. And if there's a collision, if it generates a name that already exists, it has to retry until it gets to a new unique name and then continues on. So I guess depending on how many possible unique product names, like the retries could be slowing it down a little bit. But in the end of the day, we've got our 1,000 products. And what that means is we should be able to go back to our web view where we previously had a single product and reload it. And we can see we have a heavy duty wool bag. And surprisingly, this product is made out of pure marble. We've got a price of $26.06, and we've got 783 of those in stock, and there's 1,000 of these. And so we now have our 1,000 products. If you haven't noticed already, I really like the Faker gem, primarily just because I feel like when you're working with a new Rails application, if it doesn't yet have realistic data in it, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel as good to work with an application that has a bunch of, like I used to just I'd slam my keys on the keyboard and make a bunch of entries that are just sort of like QWERTY kind of stuff. It just feels a lot nicer to have semi-realistic data. And something a bit better than lorem ipsum as well.
When you said it checks twice on the front end and the back end, does it actually reach the database or it stops somewhere before?
It stops. So the validations, the back-end validations will trigger before the database is involved. Yeah, because what isn't present is database level constraints. So if you were to then push this system to like a live production server, I would encourage at that point of actually adding the database level constraints that match your validations as well, because you just have one more level of data integrity in that way.
Okay. So this validates doesn't do anything with it?
It doesn't do anything to the database. There are some gems, I believe. I haven't used them, but I think there's some gems that'll take your validations, where you can configure your validations in a certain way that it actually creates database level constraints for you. So the only other thing I want to do centered around this system here, let's see what's happening here. Well, I need to do a git commit, that's for sure. It's been a while, so I'll do an add, and I'll do a commit. I'll see what was different. Well, my validations are different, my seed file and my gem file. This is the point where I might do like multiple commits, right? Like my validations here really shouldn't be bundled up at the same time as my seed file, right? So I could, if I wanted to, like turn off the DB folder here and just submit that, right? So I could turn that off, turn that off, turn that off, and I could just commit the changes to the product model alone. So I'd be like, added validations to the product after discussing with the business folks on the team. Then I might commit just that little change. And then I might go through and do the others. So git add and git commit. These are the other changes. And so get rid of that. Added the Faker gem and then used it in the db seeds.rb script to generate a bunch of realistic data for testing the app. that. So I'm pretty careful about that kind of thing of always separating out my commits, because I've been bitten in the past of rolling a whole bunch of things into like a unified sort of omnibus commit and then realizing, oh no, I want to reverse that. And now it's like, how do I disentangle all the things I committed at once? I wish I had only, committed them more atomically. So I'm nowadays quite careful about sort of more atomic committing. The last thing I'd like to do now is just to walk through a little bit of the scaffold generated code, and specifically to look at it from the perspective of how Rails handles MVC. And so if you remember back at the beginning of the term, I drew this picture. This is in the Rails overview notes. This is what happens when Rails receives a URI or URL at the server level, and sort of what gets triggered from that point. So what we're doing here when we go to /products, this URI, localhost :3000 with a path of /products, that's hitting our Puma server. So that's happening right here. First thing that happens is, the Rails app in itself kicks in. First thing to happen is routing. So Rails determines where /products routes to. Which controller, which action within that controller. And an action in a controller is just a method within that controller. The controller then is executed, and more specifically, the action within that controller is run. And that controller can optionally use the models in your application to speak with the database to gather data. That data gets returned to the controller, and it can then optionally share that data with an associated view. That view can contain embedded Ruby that can loop through or display the data that was provided by the controller. And then the view is injected into an overall HTML layout, which at that point is returned to the server to be sent back to the browser. So we're going to look through the generated code to see how each part of that process is working for just one of our routes. So when we scaffold up a product, we actually get 7 different routes. And we can see those 7 routes if we go to, I can't remember, is it info routes? Is it Rails routes? Is it Rails info? Yeah, it's one of those things. Rails info routes as a route is sort of a secret route that only works in development mode. It won't work in production mode. And it shows us all the valid routes in our system. And for each one, there is what's called the helper. And that's a method that will allow us to generate that route for use in a view. So if we wanted to use it with a form or use it with a link, we could use that helper to generate the valid route. Each route is paired with an HTTP verb. And when we were working in WebDev 2 with PHP, we used only 2 verbs. We used get and post. But HTTP actually has a whole bunch of other verbs. And so Rails makes use of more of those verbs. There is patch and put and delete. Patch and put actually end up routing to the same thing. That's sort of for historical reasons. But you could see, for example, that these are the URL paths. A GET request to /products does something different than a POST request to /products. So you can have actually URLs that do different things based on the verb you use with them. And this is how HTTP was sort of meant to be used. These are called RESTful routes, and that's REST as an acronym. And the acronym REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And it was a concept created by a gentleman by the name of Roy Fielding. And now you will hear it used a lot when people talk about APIs being RESTful. So it's a way of using HTTP, using verbs to interact with resources that are on a server. And Rails has sort of RESTful routing baked into it. So these are our 7 RESTful routes. And again, yeah, notice that /products and /products, those two routes from a URL perspective look the same, but depending on the verb that is used with them, they route to different things. So when you post data to /products, you trigger the create actions of the product controller. When you get /products, you trigger the index action of the products controller. So where is this defined? Where are these routes defined? They're defined in the route file. And so in the config folder, we can see the routes.rb file that's in there. That's where these routes are defined. And when you just want the default standard 7 RESTful routes, you don't even have to map them out manually. We could go through and I could show you, and I will show you in future classes, how to manually map out every separate route. But Rails also, just in the name of efficiency, allows you to use the resources command on the name of a resource, and it will just build for you the 7 RESTful routes. And so this one line here is what generates these 7 RESTful routes, and it's done in the routes.rb file. So we're one step into this process, right? We've hit the server with /products, it's gone to the routing, and the routing has said a GET request to /products should trigger the index action of the products controller. So we'll look at that. Here's my products controller. It's a class that inherits from application controller. Application controller is sitting in the same folder as it. All controllers are in the app controllers folder. An application controller is simply a place where we can put common code that we want all of our controllers to inherit, and it directly interfaces with or inherits from action controller base. So everything that it is to be a controller comes from action controller base, but we have a place to put sort of common stuff that we might want all of our controllers to inherit from here. And in this products controller, you can see there is a method named index. That's the index action. And handily in comments above it, the route that would trigger that action is present there. I get to /products. And it's actually true that a get to /products and .json will work as well. So if we do a get to /products, we get an HTML representation of that resource. And if we do products.json, we get a JSON representation of that resource, which is lovely. That means that we have an API built for us for free here. And what's happening inside of this index action, that is this step. We're at the controller, and the controller can now interact with a model to fetch data from the database. So what's happening in the index action? We're going to product.all. And I could modify this. Like, what if I wanted all my products to be listed in order of price, right? So I could do like an order price here, or an order title for alphabetical ordering, right? So I could change the order of the return product set at this point, or I could limit it for pagination purposes, right? I could do all sorts of interesting stuff here. I'll leave it at all. And then it's saving to an instance variable, an @products instance variable. And this is where Rails is a very object-oriented framework in a very object-oriented language. But there's certain places in Rails where the decision has been made to sort of break OO conventions completely. And one of the major tenets of object orientation is encapsulation. And the way that encapsulation is handled in Ruby is that our instance variables are by default private within our objects. Ruby, though, is a very flexible programming language, as you all know, and so it allows us, if we want to, just to blow that all apart. And so Rails blows that apart by automatically sharing anything that we create as an instance variable within an action with an associated view. So the view is not part of this controller class. It's not part of the object at all. It's a separate thing, but Rails just goes and breaks OO, busts down that encapsulation, and shares this variable with it. And the associated view is going to be automatically loaded. So at this point, we're going to load the associated view, which is going to be in the app views folder. There's going to be a subfolder named after our controller. So there's going to be a product subfolder. And then there's going to be a view file named after our action. So there's going to be an index.html.erb. ERB. And I will put this on a new line so it's all. So it's going to load the associated view with access to @products. And that's the associated view. And so we can look at that associated view now. It's in the views folder, in the product subfolder, and it's called index.html. And you can also see that there is a index.json JBuilder, and that's what allows us to have a JSON representation. So there's a view for the HTML representation, and there's a view for the JSON representation. I'm going to open up the HTML one. Anytime you see a double file extension, that's an indication that the extension on the far right gets compiled down to the one to the left of it. So in this case, we're going to have a HTML file that has embedded Ruby in it, and when that embedded Ruby is all done and processed, we'll be left with just HTML. Same thing goes here. This is a file that has JBuilder syntax in it, which is sort of a domain-specific language for building up JSON, but that'll be compiled down to just a JSON document, or parsed down to a JSON document at the end. So this index.html.erb is going to have access to a products without having to pass it to it or anything. Like the view is not an object at all, it's just a template, and this template has access to that variable. First thing we notice about the view is it's not the full HTML page. It doesn't start with a valid HTML HTML tag or a body tag or a head or any of that. It's just the core of the HTML. Remember, we're at this layer now. The ERB within this view is about to be processed, and then that's going to be injected into a layout where the rest of the HTML lives. So you can see here it says products up at the top, and there's a table here with a header on top of it. If we go back to here, and we go to my /products, that's this. If we were to view source on this, we would see that this is a table. There's that H1. It's slow because of how many products I have in there. So there's this notice, which is empty. We'll get into that in a bit of a future lesson, but we have this H1 here that says products. There's the table with the header row, and then within a T-body, we have a separate row for each product, where each product includes the title, the description, the price, the quantity, a link to the show, a link to the edit, and a link to the destroy. So what does that look like from the view? Well, there's the H1 with the word products in it. There's our table. Here's where the magic happens. This is like, it goes all the way to here, but this is where the magic happens right here. Inside of the T-body, we've got embedded Ruby. And this is the part of Rails that was inspired by PHP. So remember, DHH was a PHP programmer before he created Rails, and he really liked the use of PHP as a templating language, how PHP handled templating with embedded PHP tags. And so you have embedded ERB tags here that are very similar. And so this is a loop. This is a @products.each loop. Notice here's that @products variable. That's all of our products gathered up by our controller. That's this thing. Product.all got saved there. That got shared, so we have access over here. For each of the products, we're going to call each one product in turn. And then this is ERB, now we're back into HTML. So we're gonna generate this HTML for each pass of the loop. And within each pass of the loop, we're gonna generate a row with a column, and then this is an echo. So in PHP, it was less than question mark equals for an echo. Here in ERB, it's less than % equals for an echo, and we're echoing out the product's title, and its description, and its price, and its stock quantity. And we're using a helper method, the link to helper, to generate hrefs, so A tags with href attributes for the show, the edit, and destroy. And those will automatically use the Rails routing system to properly route to the correct RESTful routes. So link to show product, that's going to properly route to the route, which is wrong one here. It's going to properly route to this show path. And it will build the URI component, and it will put the ID of the product into the correct place. So it will generate a /product/ whatever the ID of the current product is. So it builds the correct show path for us. It also builds an edit link based on that product that will go to the edit. So it'll build a /product/ the ID of the product /edit. And it builds a destroy, which is going to, these two are going to use GET requests because that's the default for links. This one's going to circumvent the default and force a delete, which will trigger this route right here. And we even get a confirmation message here, which will trigger JavaScript. So this isn't standard JavaScript. Rails has JavaScript that's packaged with each of the pages. It's going to pick up this data attribute, see that there's a confirm there, and it's going to bind an on-click confirmation to that link. So if I was to try to delete something over here, I get an "Are you sure?" And that "Are you sure?" came from here. And we're almost at the full loop, right? We've routed /products to the index action in the controller. That index action fetched by way of the product model all products. Those came back to the controller, placed in an instance variable. The instance variable was shared with the view, which included embedded ERB, which looped through all of the products, spitting out HTML. Then that view now gets passed to a layout. That's the very final stage here. That layout is found in the layouts folder. By default, there's a layout, but we can have multiples. And it's called application.html.erb, so you can see it supports embedded Ruby as well. It's quite simple to begin with. It has some embedded tags to embed in the default style sheets in JavaScript that Rails uses. And within the body, we have a single yield, and that's where all of the views are injected. This yield statement injects the view. I could put a header in here or a footer in here that was included now on every page. All sorts of possibilities for this this particular layout file. And we've now closed the loop, right? We've ended up back at the server, and that gets sent back to our browser. And that is our high-level overview of what happens for a single Rails request. We can see the slightly different path that would happen, which is not visually shown here, for a JSON representation. So remember that our routes are built up here. The index is the same action that is going to be triggered regardless of if we've done a .json or not. But if we look at our routing file, the parentheses denote optional. So there's an optional format that's being specified here. If it's left out, we get the HTML representation. If we provide it, it's going to go to the same controller action but load up a different view. And so we can do that now. We can go to products.json, and it'll take a second. maybe. Ta-da. And that is the JSON representation. You can see it's an array at the outer level, the square braces. And what is it an array of? It's an array of JavaScript objects with all the key value pairs, one for each of our 1,000 products that are being displayed. And so that is what I wanted to cover for today. We've done our full loop of the R MVC cycle. We've looked at some scaffolded code, but not all of it. So remember, there's a whole bunch of other stuff happening in here. And we'll continue to look through this next week, as well as the views, and you'll sort of get acquainted with what's happening for all of those 7 RESTful routes. So you'll sort of learn how to do all of CRUD by way of investigating the scaffold. And that's all I got for you for today. And so